our number 10 spot we have the fire. This is a photo that comes to us from 2003 at the Station nightclub in Rhode Island, and it shows the band Great White as they perform. While this seems like just a regular photo that someone took on their Motorola Razr, what ensued shortly after this photo was taken is absolutely tragic. Basically, as the band performed, there were some pyrotechnics that were set off, and while this was meant to be a spectacular display, it only ended up in disaster. The fireworks ended up setting all of the flammable acoustic foam in the walls and ceiling on fire, and within 1 minute, everything that was combustible was up in flames. Within 2 minutes, the entire club was fully engulfed in black smoke, and people were having trouble finding exits. In the end, this fire took the lives of 100 people, and another 230 were injured as a result. It has gone down in US history as one of the worst and most deadly nightclub fires. In our number 9 spot today, we have the core. This photo shows a physicist named Harold New, and while this looks like a relatively normal, non-threatening photo, what he has in his hand is truly devastating. Harold is holding the nuclear core of what was nicknamed the Fat Man atomic bomb. This means that Harold is holding the nuclear core of the atomic bomb that was later dropped on Nagasaki in 1945. The immediate blast, of course, took many lives, but so did the long-term effects of the bomb, like radiation illnesses and that sort of thing. It's crazy to look at a photo like this because it seems so perfectly normal when he literally has a life-changing, world-ending device in the palm of his hand. Also, I don't think I could ever hold something like that. Not only would I just not want to, but I don't think I could even get near it for fear of something going wrong. In our number 8 spot today, we have the eruption. This is a photo that is showing Mount Pinatubo, which is located in the Philippines on June 15th, 1991. That is the day that this volcano erupted into what would be the second largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. Certainly impressive, also extremely terrifying. This photo shows the pyroclastic flow full of hot gas and rock being flung into the air. Eruptive activity in the volcano first started on April 2nd of that year, which prompted researchers to set up seismographs in the area. By June, the volcano was having a group of progressively shallower eruptions before, on June 12th, the volcano had its first spectacular eruption, which sent an ash column 19 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Additional smaller explosions continued on June 13th, which then led to some intense seismic activity. After more highly gas-charged magma reached the surface, on June 15th, the volcano once again exploded, this time sending the cloud of ash 40 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Volcanic ash and pumice blanketed the surrounding areas, and pyroclastic flows filled what were once deep valleys with fresh volcanic deposits. It is truly magnificent and extremely powerful, and this photo shows just that. In our number 7 spot today, we have post-war. This is a photo that is said to have been taken in 1946, just after the end of the Second World War. Story goes that the person in this photo is a soldier who had just returned home from war, which would already be difficult and challenging enough, but as he returned home, he came to hear the news that unfortunately, despite his survival, his family had lost their lives during the war. There is no doubt about the impact that either world war had on the world, and how the impact doesn't stop once the war is over. These wars changed the course of history, and they changed people's lives forever. This is definitely a difficult photo to look at, and it's an eerie reminder of those dark times. In our number 6 spot today, we have the disguise. Speaking of the Second World War, as it began to come to a close, many of the Germans who were involved in all of the many violations of human rights began to flee or try and hide or disguise themselves for fear of being persecuted. One of those was, of course, the worst of them all, Hitler himself. This photo, or rather series of photos, was created by the US government as an attempt to document the many ways that he could have disguised himself in order to escape being recognized and captured. At the time, the fear of him being able to escape responsibility and go on living his life abroad was very real. I mean, there have been others who actually did manage to do just that, and that is exactly the reason for these photos. There's also something kind of interesting and bizarre about what happens when we take away the features of his that we know him by. In the end, he didn't escape and go on to live abroad, but he did escape being held responsible before the world. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Titanic. We all know the story of the Titanic. I mean, it's one of the most famous in history, and this photo comes from just before the historic iceberg encounter. On April 10th, 1912, the Titanic set sail on its maiden voyage, heading from Southampton over to New York City. The ship took a couple of stops along the way, one in France, one in Ireland, before setting off for the United States officially, and somewhere along the beginning part of its journey, someone was able to snap a photo of the ship as it sailed. It's not clear exactly where this photo was taken, but it is thought to be the last photo taken of the ship before its tragic end. Considering it was only 4 days after the ship set sail that it hit the iceberg, it is likely that this photo came not too long before the terrible day. In our number 4 spot today, we have the lipstick killer. This is a photo that comes to us from December 10th, 1945. If looking at this image gives you a shudder down your spine, that absolutely makes sense, as it was written by a terrible person known as the lipstick killer. This photo is an image of a note he left written on the wall at one of his crime scenes. The photo comes from the apartment of Frances Brown, as just before he wrote this message, he took her life. After this message was left, he ended up taking the life of one other person because he was finally caught by the police 6 months later. The message scrawled in the photo reads, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." It is an absolutely chilling note with a horrific backstory. In our number 3 spot today, we have bad politics. This is a photo that shows the former First Lady Rosalynn Carter, and you may or may not be wondering who that man next to her is. And to that I say, my friends, that is the horrible, horrible monster that is John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown. This photo was taken at a Polish Constitution Day celebration in Chicago in 1978, which is the same year that Gacy was arrested for his crimes, so at the point this photo was taken, he had already taken the lives of at least 20 people. The reason he was there and was able to meet the First Lady is because he was not only the worst of the worst, he also somehow became the Democratic precinct captain in the Chicago suburbs in the 1970s, and he was the marshal of the Polish parade. The picture is even signed, quote, "To John Gacy, best wishes, Rosalynn Carter." It's terrible. I hate it so much. I feel very bad for anyone who had to meet him. In our number 2 spot today, we have the first day. This is a photo that shows Dorothy Count Scoggins as she joined her new school. What should be a perfectly normal activity was certainly anything but for Dorothy, as she was the first black person to attend Harding High School in Charlotte, North Carolina, which was previously an all-white school. After the passing of the Purcell Plan in 1956, there were 40 students who applied for transfers, and Dorothy was one of 4 who was accepted. This photo clearly shows that although small steps were being taken within the law to prevent segregation, there were no steps being taken within the students. As Dorothy just tries to get an education, you can see her peers clearly trying to disturb her peace. After 4 days of this kind of treatment, Dorothy's parents ended up withdrawing her from the school over fears for her safety. These images, however, were seen around the world. This photo acts as quite the reminder for where we were really not all that long ago. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Challenger crew. This is a photo that was taken of the clearly very excited Challenger crew as they walked down the ramp ready to head off on their mission. The crew even included 37-year-old Krista McAuliffe, who was a high school social studies teacher. She had won a spot on this mission through a program with NASA called the Teacher in Space program, and she had trained diligently for months in order to be the first non-military person in space. On January 28, 1986, the Challenger mission proved to be fateful just 73 seconds after liftoff. 2 rubber O-rings failed because of the cold temperatures of the morning, and on live television the world watched as the spacecraft broke apart and plunged into the ocean, sadly taking the lives of everyone on board. It is an absolutely tragic event made even more chilling by this final photo. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Mad. This is a photo that was taken of someone known as the Mad. His real name was George Metesky, and he was the man who terrorized New York City for 16 years while he planted explosives in public places like an absolute psychopath. I guess he was apparently angry about a workplace injury he had suffered in the years prior to his terrible crimes, so of course the normal, reasonable jump to make would be not that. While no one should have ever had to suffer because of these crimes, the good news is that while he planted 33 and set off 22 of them, miraculously only 15 people ended up injured in the end. This photo of him behind bars is extremely eerie thanks to his creepy smile and haunting eyes. I might be the only one who feels it, but it just seems like something's off. You know? In our number 9 spot today, we have ancient preparations. This is a photo that isn't necessarily very old, but it's of some stuff that has been around for a lot longer than cameras have. These images were taken in the ancient city of Herxheim, which is located in Germany and dates back to about 7,000 years ago. The photo shows some artifacts which at a first glance don't look too dark or creepy or weird, but just wait. Apparently these artifacts and remains show clear signs of flesh stripping. Yeah, okay, wasn't expecting that one. Apparently this was a process that was part of the preparation before consuming human flesh. So yeah, maybe it is a pretty dark photo after all. I'm not exactly sure how all of these things were used or what exactly the process looks like, but I think that maybe that information might just be better left in the past. In our number 8 spot today, we have the lone scientist. This is a photo that comes to us from shortly after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Many of us of course already know plenty about it, but if unfamiliar, in April of 1986 there was an explosion and fire from a nuclear reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This explosion happened when there was an issue as they were trying to begin an experiment which was set out to actually make the reactor more safe. Unfortunately, the way this reactor was designed placed too much responsibility in the hands of the operator. One thing led to another and it was a huge disaster and went on to become one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. The amount of radiation in the air caused alarms at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, which was over 1,000 kilometers away, so it certainly wasn't anything to take lightly. That is exactly why this photo of a lone scientist going down into the dark radioactive filled area near the meltdown is so terrifying to look at. It reminds us of the bravery of those who went to help after the disaster, and it also reminds us just how scary some of the things we have on this planet really are. In our number 7 spot today, we have the figures of the fire. This photo is both extremely unsettling and super captivating as it shows a scene after the Great Fire at Madame Tussauds in 1925. Of course, this wax museum is famous for the extremely lifelike wax figures that are created and find their home there, so you can only imagine the aftermath of a fire. These lifelike figures, but with missing heads and appendages, burnt skin and hair, and just clothing in disarray. Seeing this photo for the first time without knowing the story about it was definitely a bit of a confusing and terrifying experience. The heads on the ground really freaked me out for a full 5 seconds. As scary as it is, I'm just glad to hear that it's not real and just some creative casualties rather than what this photo appears to be at first. In our number 6 spot today, we have All Hallows Eve. In this day and age when Halloween time comes around, we see all types of costumes. We see a few spooky scary ones, but for the most part we see princesses or fairies or basketball players or some sort of pop culture reference, but back in the day, Halloween was a terrifying time. I'm not saying that because people dressed as all these elaborate scary creatures, I just mean that the absolute scraps people would throw together to make a Halloween mask are truly scarier than any creature I could come up with. This photo just shows a nice little family as they're ready to celebrate the spookiest day of the year, and oh my gosh, it is actually terrifying. Like, I feel like I'm looking at a still from the movie Strangers or something. It looks so terrifying, but it's likely just a completely harmless and innocent celebration. Honestly, well, I'm kind of over seeing people show up to Halloween parties as cats. I'll take that over a potato sack any day, apparently. In our number 5 spot today, we have The Experiment. This is a photo that comes from some experiments that were being conducted from the French neurologist Duchenne de Boulogne. He was best known for his use of photographs during his experiments, as evidenced by, well, this video. He was also known for his research into the use of electrical stimulation of muscles, and of course these photos really help to capture exactly that. These photos have gone down in history not even necessarily for what they show medically, but just because of how startling they are and the often grotesque facial expressions seen on the patient. The experiment being conducted in this shot was meant to determine how exactly the muscles in the face produce facial expressions, which he believed at the time were directly linked to the soul of a man. Of course, these strange faces the patient is making are due to the electrical stimulation, but the photos from his experiments truly make it look like the patients are going through some kind of torment or torture. As far as I know, the man in this photo was totally fine both before and after the experiment, despite what it may appear as, which is always what we want to hear. In our number 4 spot today, we have The Spectre. This is a photo that was taken in England in 1963, and it became known as the Spectre of the Newby Church. That, of course, is because of the ghostly figure that can be seen in this photo. I'm always a little suspicious of ghost photos. Some are certainly more convincing than others, but Photoshop in 1963 wasn't exactly as accessible and easy as it is now. The photo is said to have been taken by Reverend K.F. Lord inside of the Newby Church, which is located in North Yorkshire, England. Of course, I mean, like many of us are going to do, people were really skeptical of this apparition and just believed that it was a well done case of double exposure, which, to be fair, is entirely possible. The Reverend continued to swear up and down, however, that the photo was not doctored, so at this point there's no proof to prove either side, and it's just a game of he said she said. So what do you guys think? Apparition caught slippin', or is the Reverend making it up? In our number 3 spot today, we have the eruption of Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is a stratovolcano located in Skamania County, Washington. The volcano is best known for its huge and disastrous eruption on May 18, 1980. This photograph comes from the photographer Robert Landsberg, who of course was in the area at the time of the eruption. Before the eruption, he had visited the area in order to photograph and document all of the changes that were happening. On May 18th, he was within a few miles of the volcano when it erupted. Since he unfortunately was so close to the explosion, he knew he would be unable to escape this disaster, so instead of focusing on the impossible, he focused on taking as many pictures as possible. Robert was obviously incredibly brave and dedicated, but he was also very smart. After snapping as many photos as he could, including this one, he then secured his camera in his backpack and covered his backpack with his body. He knew he was unlikely to survive, but he wanted to make sure that these photos did. His body was found 17 days later with his backpack still underneath him. His film was of course developed and has provided geologists with some really valuable insights with his close documentation of the eruption. In our number 2 spot today, we have the boneyard. This is a photo that comes from what is called a boneyard. Basically, the photo was taken during a time when it was normal for overcrowded cemeteries to dig up skeletons after 5 years if the family didn't continue to pay for them to stay buried. Yeah. It's not a great rule, but it happened and it's a part of our weird dark history. This particular photo comes from near the Colon Cemetery in Cuba, and it shows what they did with these dug up bones. They put them in this boneyard that eventually grew to be 30 feet deep. That is so creepy. This photo shows how the area became a popular tourist destination, and this photo is said to have been taken after the Spanish-American War, and it shows 2 American soldiers playing with bones. Maybe not the best idea. I mean, a little respect for those who passed might be in order. It definitely is an eerie sight to behold. In our number 1 spot today, we have the crypt. This is a photo that comes to us from the early 1900s, and it shows the area that is beneath the Church of Santa Maria della Concezione di Cappuccini, which is located in Rome, Italy. This area is known as the Capuchin Crypt, and it is a little eerie to say the least. That is because the walls are lined with skeletal remains. It is said that on the walls there are the remains of 3,700 bodies believed to be the Catholic friars who were buried by their order. It is definitely terrifying to look at, and it seems a little nightmare-inducing, but the Catholic order insists it isn't meant to be so macabre. They explain that it's actually meant to be a silent reminder of the swift passage of life on Earth and our own mortality. Well, I can say it definitely does that.
Starting off this countdown, we have Paul Walker. On November 30th, 2013, Paul Walker attended a charity event for Reach Out Worldwide. He was last captured driving off in a red Porsche Carrera GT. Little did he know that later that day, the car would crash into a concrete lamppost and 2 trees before bursting into flames, killing Walker and the driver instantly. It's so sad looking at this photo. Like, Paul seemed happy. He got into the car not knowing his fate. In fact, what makes this scarier is that he might have still been alive had it not been for one text. He woke up that morning completely forgetting about the charity event that he had to go to. That was until someone texted him to remind him. Had he not gone to the event and just stayed home, things would have been different.
Coming in at number 9, we have Robin Williams, one of the greatest actors and comedic minds that has ever passed through Hollywood. There was movie after movie that this guy made that influenced people from my generation and so many generations after. And right before we get further into this point, guys, remember that you can like, comment, subscribe, and hit the little notification bell, and stick around to the end of the list because we're going to be answering some comments from our previous video, Top 10 Disney Mysteries. I mean, we can go down the list. This guy was in Aladdin, Jumanji, Mrs. Doubtfire. All of those movies were certified bangers, and this was the last picture of him before he passed. He looks so happy. He's chilling out with his monkey Crystal, and the 2 of them are just being the best of friends, but even having one of the coolest pets of all time wasn't enough to keep him happy. Unfortunately, shortly after this picture was taken, Robin Williams would visit the doctor and get a very sad diagnosis. It would seem that he had Parkinson's. It was devastating news that would lead to him taking his own life. Apparently, he was misdiagnosed and he actually had a specific type of dementia which leads to paranoia.
In our 8th spot, we have Amelia Earhart. The fate of Amelia Earhart is still unknown. Did she die in a plane crash? Did she get stranded on a deserted island? We honestly don't know. In 1937, Amelia set out with her navigator Fred Noonan to fly around the world. One of the last photos of Amelia was her packing her suitcase for travels, in which she would never return from. Much like these other celebrities, she looked so happy, just excited to go on this adventure. But little did she know it would end in tragedy. Amelia and Fred were last heard from on July 2nd, 1937. The government spent 15 years looking for them. In fact, searching for Earhart was the largest and most expensive search in American history. Sadly, hardly anything came of this. They thought that maybe the plane crashed somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, but who really knows?
Coming in at number 7, we have Gene Wilder. It's impressive how Gene Wilder was able to be both hilarious and terrifying in many of his performances. Like throughout most of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he's kind of scary, but then when you check out Blazing Saddles, he's one of the funniest dudes around. This was the last picture taken of him, or at least the last one that was shared to the public. He lived well into his 80s, and in this picture you can see him with his daughter walking in Los Angeles. It was in 2013 when one of the most famous actors in the world would learn that he was battling Alzheimer's. This is obviously a very strenuous disease, and it can slowly wither a person away. It's a tough battle, and because of this, Gene wanted to stay out of the public eye. So after he was told by doctors that he was fighting Alzheimer's, he decided that he would stay out of the peering eye of fans and become a homebody. And I mean, it sounds like a solid move. You had an amazing career, so in your last few years it would be nice to relax. He passed away in 2016.
Coming in at number 6, we have Chris McCandless. Chris was a 24-year-old American adventurer. In 1992, Chris set out on another adventure, this time into the Alaskan wilderness. However, he never made it out alive. His death has been debated for years. Some say he died of starvation, others believe that he died of poisoning after eating toxic berries. The last photo ever captured of Chris was a picture he took of himself smiling and waving to the camera, holding a note. The note is believed to have said, "I have had a happy life and thank the Lord. Goodbye and may God bless all." Later, he was found dead by a group of hunters. The hunters were looking for a shelter for the night when they came across the bus where Chris was staying in. But when they entered, they discovered Chris laying in his sleeping bag at the back of the bus. His manes were already decomposing. Now, the last thing Chris ever wrote read, "Day 107. Beautiful blueberries." Then days 108 through 112 contained no words, they just had slashes. And on day 113, there was no entry at all. So maybe it was some toxic berry that killed him. But still, this photo is super eerie, especially because of the sign he was holding. It's like he knew he wasn't going to make it.
Coming in at number 5, we have Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest minds to ever grace the earth. This dude was straight up one of the smartest people who has ever lived. If it wasn't for this guy, we wouldn't have the radio, we wouldn't have access to electricity the way that we do today. And even though he has nothing to do with the company Tesla that makes electric cars, there would be a solid chance that those electric cars wouldn't be running right now if it wasn't for the inventions that this man made. This was the last known picture of the inventor. He looks like he was ill, but he was actually mostly thin because he had changed his diet to eating very light. He wouldn't eat meat, and he mostly lived off bread, honey, and vegetable juices. Probably the saddest part about the end of Tesla's life is that he basically had no money, although he did find pleasure in pigeons. For some reason, the inventor had an obsession with pigeons. He would go to the park and feed them, and even said that they gave him some of the ideas for his inventions. That's the secret. We've got to start hanging out with more pigeons.
In our 4th spot, we have James Dean. On September 30th, 1955, James Dean died in a car accident at only 24 years old. It's said that he was driving fast and suddenly had to swerve out of the way to avoid an oncoming car, but ended up hitting it almost head on. It's said that Dean died instantly, but his passenger survived with injuries. That day, Dean was photographed posing with the very car he later died in. In fact, that car is said to be cursed. He only owned it for 9 days before his death. Later, after he died, the car rolled off the back of a truck and crushed the legs of a mechanic. Then the car's parts were disassembled and installed into other cars around the world. All those car owners also got into deadly crashes. So Dean's last picture was literally with a cursed car that killed him.
Coming in at number 3, we have Aaliyah. Aaliyah was a rising star in the R&B community, and it seemed that she was going to be the next star in the music industry. Literally everyone who was into music was talking about her. Before she was 22 years old, she had already won 14 awards and been nominated for 73 awards through different music organizations. There's a good portion of us who don't even have our driver's license at 22, but her death would shock the world. Either one of those two pictures is thought to be the last of Aaliyah. They didn't have timestamps on every last picture back then, so we don't know exactly which one it is. But Aaliyah would board a plane that was headed to the Bahamas. It should have been a nice short trip, but the plane crashed. Out of nowhere, the next big thing in music was gone.
In our second spot, we have John Lennon. On December 8th, 1980, John Lennon was assassinated outside of his Manhattan apartment. Earlier that day, Lennon was photographed signing autographs for fans. The last photo of him was him signing an autograph for the man who would later murder him. It's so eerie. The photo literally foreshadows his fate. He was literally pictured with his killer. Later that night, the man in the photo, David Chapman, returned to Lennon's apartment and waited outside for him. When he came down, Chapman shot him 4 times in the back. That's just way too freaky for me.
And coming in at the number 1 spot, we have Marilyn Monroe. I mean, what didn't Marilyn Monroe do? It's thought that she changed how women could represent themselves in the public eye. She was one of the biggest beauty icons of all time. It's thought that she had an affair with the President of the United States. She was a bona fide legend, and she may never be forgotten. This was the last known picture taken of the superstar. She was hanging out with one of her buddies, Buddy Greco, who was a famous jazz musician of the time. Man, jazz has changed a lot. It used to be the coolest thing in town. There's no way you could be playing jazz now and it would get you into the arms of Scarlett Johansson. On the record, her death was deemed a suicide, but off the record, it seemed that the CIA might have taken her out. She knew too many secrets from being close to the president. They couldn't let those secrets leak out.